A routine day at LAX turned explosive when a racist cop acted on lies from a bitter passenger. He thought he was putting a suspicious woman in her place, but she was far from ordinary. The truth about her identity shook the entire police unit and sparked national headlines. This is more than just an airport confrontation. It's a lesson in power, prejudice, and accountability. Before we begin, get comfortable, relax, and make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss more dramatic stories ahead. The late afternoon sun poured through the towering glass windows of Los Angeles International Airport, casting long shadows across the bustling terminal. It was a typical Friday at LAX, with travelers weaving through the crowds, their suitcases clattering on the polished floors. The air buzzed with a mix of excitement and impatience. Announcements blared over the loudspeakers, coffee shops hummed with chatter, and the faint smell of fast food lingered. At Gate 47, where American Airlines Flight 312 to Sacramento was set to board, passengers were already lining up, some scrolling through their phones, others clutching boarding passes. Among them stood Evelyn Carter, a 55-year-old black woman waiting calmly in the priority line for business class. As a justice of the California Supreme Court, Evelyn had just wrapped up a 3-day legal conference in Los Angeles. She was dressed in a neatly tailored navy blazer, a cream-colored blouse, and a pencil skirt, her low-heeled shoes practical yet elegant. A sleek leather briefcase rested by her side, and she wore thin-framed glasses as she skimmed case notes on her iPad, her face focused but tired. After a long week, she looked forward to a quiet weekend at home in Sacramento. Evelyn blended into the crowd, her demeanor unassuming, but not everyone saw her that way. A few feet away, Margaret Hensley, a 68-year-old retired real estate executive, stood with her arms crossed, her lips pursed in irritation. Margaret, a white woman from a wealthy San Diego suburb, was draped in a designer dress, her wrists and neck sparkling with diamonds. Her perfectly styled hair and heavy makeup gave her an air of self-importance, but her eyes scanned the priority line with disdain. To Margaret, the sight of Evelyn, a black woman, standing in the same line as her, was an affront. She muttered under her breath to her travel companion, loud enough for those nearby to catch fragments of her words. "These days, anyone can get into business class. Doesn't seem right." Her companion nodded vaguely, but Margaret wasn't satisfied with whispers. She wanted action. Striding up to the gate agent's desk, Margaret leaned in, her voice sharp but sugary. "Excuse me, miss," she said to Lisa Nguyen, the young agent managing the boarding process. "Why am I stuck waiting with certain people?" She tilted her head toward Evelyn, her tone dripping with accusation. "That woman over there, she doesn't look like she belongs in business class. She's been eyeing my handbag this whole time and I don't feel safe. You should check her ticket, make sure it's legit." Lisa, caught off guard, glanced at Evelyn, who was still absorbed in her iPad, unaware of the brewing storm. "Ma'am, everyone in the priority line has a valid ticket," Lisa said politely, trying to diffuse the situation. But Margaret wasn't having it. She raised her voice, insisting, "I'm telling you, something's not right. Do your job." Her words carried across the gate area, drawing curious glances from other passengers and setting the stage for a confrontation that would soon spiral out of control. Lisa Nguyen's cheeks flushed as Margaret Hensley's sharp words echoed at Gate 47. The young gate agent fumbled with her computer, trying to explain that Evelyn Carter's business class ticket was perfectly valid, but Margaret's loud complaints drowned her out. "This is ridiculous," Margaret snapped, her diamond bracelets jangling as she waved a hand toward Evelyn. "I'm not flying with someone who doesn't belong here. Check her papers, now!" The commotion rippled through the crowded terminal, catching the attention of 2 airport police officers patrolling nearby. Mark Sullivan, a 52-year-old veteran with a weathered face and a habit of sizing people up quickly, turned toward the gate. Beside him was Brian Delgado, a 34-year-old rookie eager to prove himself, his eyes narrowing as he followed Sullivan's gaze. Margaret's raised voice was like a beacon, and the officers made their way over, their heavy boots thudding on the marble floor. As they approached, Margaret's demeanor shifted from indignant to almost theatrical. "Oh, thank goodness you're here!" she exclaimed, clutching her designer handbag. "Officers, you've got to help. That woman," she said, pointing directly at Evelyn, who was still engrossed in her iPad. "She's acting suspicious. She's been staring at my bag this whole time, and I just don't trust her. Who knows how she got a business class ticket? I don't feel safe with her on my flight." Her words were laced with insinuation, each syllable poking at Evelyn's presence as if it were a personal offense. Evelyn glanced up, her brow furrowing slightly as she registered the accusation, but she stayed calm, setting her iPad down on her briefcase. Sullivan, his years on the job making him quick to trust a well-dressed white woman like Margaret, scanned Evelyn from head to toe. Her polished blazer and leather bag didn't quite match the picture Margaret was painting, but he'd seen enough complaints to know it was easier to act first and sort things out later. Delgado, meanwhile, was already bristling, his hand resting on his belt, as if anticipating trouble. "Ma'am," Sullivan said, his voice firm but not yet hostile, stepping toward Evelyn. "Can you step out of line, please? We need to talk." The other passengers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to notice, others whispering to each other. Evelyn closed her iPad case with a soft click and met Sullivan's eyes, her expression composed but alert. "May I ask what this is about, officer?" she said evenly, her tone professional, like she was addressing a courtroom. "We've had a complaint," Sullivan replied, nodding toward Margaret, who stood with a smug half-smile. "Someone says you're acting suspicious. Maybe a security risk. We need to see your ID and boarding pass." Delgado chimed in, his voice sharper. "Let's make this quick. Hand them over." Evelyn's lips tightened, but she reached into her briefcase, pulling out her California driver's license and business class boarding pass. She handed them to Sullivan, her movements deliberate. "Here are my documents," she said, her voice steady. "But I'd like to know exactly what I'm being accused of. I've been standing here quietly, waiting to board, just like everyone else." Her question hung in the air, and Sullivan's jaw twitched. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in front of a crowd. Delgado stepped closer, his impatience bubbling over. "Look, we don't need a debate," he said, his tone dripping with irritation. "When we ask for your ID, you give it to us. Why are you making this hard?" Sullivan glanced at the boarding pass, then back at Evelyn, his eyes lingering on her attire. "Business class, huh?" he said, his voice carrying a hint of skepticism. "What do you do for a living?" The question wasn't just curious, it was a jab, and Evelyn felt it. She straightened, her gaze locking onto Sullivan's. "I'm happy to cooperate," she said firmly, "but I expect to be treated with respect. What's your name and badge number, officer?" The air grew tense, and Margaret's smile widened, sensing trouble brewing. Evelyn Carter stood just outside the priority line at Gate 47, her posture straight despite the weight of Mark Sullivan's and Brian Delgado's scrutiny. The hum of LAX's terminal buzzed around them, but the air at the gate felt thick with tension. Sullivan held Evelyn's driver's license and business class boarding pass, his eyes flicking between the documents and her face. "So, you're telling me you're just standing here, minding your own business?" he said, his tone heavy with doubt. "Then why's a passenger saying you're trouble?" Evelyn's expression remained calm, but her voice carried a quiet strength. "I'd like to know the details of this complaint, officer. I've done nothing wrong." Margaret Hensley, standing a few feet away, folded her arms, her lips curling into a satisfied smirk as she watched the scene unfold. Delgado, younger and quick to anger, stepped closer, his face reddening. "You don't get to ask questions," he snapped. "We're the ones in charge here. What's with the attitude?" Sullivan raised a hand to quiet Delgado, but kept his focus on Evelyn. Let's try this again, he said, his voice slower, more pointed. How'd you get this business class ticket? What do you do that gets you in this line? The questions weren't just routine. They dripped with assumptions about her race and status. Evelyn's fingers tightened briefly around the handle of her briefcase, but she kept her composure. My profession and how I purchased my ticket are irrelevant unless you have evidence of wrongdoing, she said, her words clear and measured. I'm a law-abiding citizen, and I have the right to be treated fairly. I've asked for your names and badge numbers. Please provide them. The crowd at the gate grew quieter, passengers exchanging uneasy glances. Some pulled out their phones, discreetly recording the exchange. Lisa Nuxian, the gate agent, hovered nearby, her hands fidgeting as she tried to intervene. Officers, maybe we can sort this out quietly, she said. But Delgado shot her a glare that silenced her. Margaret, emboldened by the officer's aggression, piped up. See? She's being difficult. That's not how honest people act. Her words fueled Delgado's temper. You heard the lady, he said, stepping so close to Evelyn that she could see the veins in his neck. You're making this worse for yourself. Keep talking like that, and you're not getting on this flight. His voice carried a venom that turned heads, and a few passengers gasped. Evelyn's heart pounded, but her face stayed steady. You're crossing a line, she said, her tone firm but controlled. Your behavior is unprofessional and discriminatory. I'm asking you to follow protocol and treat me with respect. That was the breaking point for Delgado. Respect, he shouted, his voice booming across the gate area. You don't tell us what to do, lady. You think you're better than us because you've got some fancy ticket? The racial undertone was unmistakable, and the crowd's murmurs grew louder. Sullivan, who'd been content to let Delgado take the lead, now joined in. Enough of this, he growled. You're causing a scene. Turn around. You're under arrest for disturbing the peace and threatening airport security. The charges were flimsy, pulled out of thin air, but Sullivan's tone left no room for argument. Before Evelyn could respond, Delgado grabbed her arm, yanking it behind her back with more force than necessary. She winced but didn't resist, knowing any struggle would be twisted against her. The cold snap of handcuffs bit into her wrists, the metal digging into her skin. This is wrong, and you know it, she said, her voice steady despite the pain. You have no grounds for this. Delgado ignored her, shoving her forward as he muttered insults under his breath, words that stung with racial venom. The crowd was stunned. Some passengers looked away, ashamed, while others whispered in disbelief. A middle-aged couple near the front shook their heads, the wife clutching her husband's arm. This is outrageous, she whispered. But no one stepped forward, fear holding them back. Margaret stood off to the side, her smile now a full grin, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She'd gotten what she wanted. Evelyn, humiliated and powerless, being marched away in cuffs. Lisa Nguyen tried again to intervene, her voice shaking. Officers, please, let's talk about this. But Sullivan waved her off, his face hard. Stay out of it, he barked. As Delgado pushed Evelyn toward the terminal's main corridor, her head remained high, her dignity intact despite the cuffs and the stares. The crowd's eyes followed her, a mix of pity, shock, and guilt in their faces. Evelyn's mind raced, cataloging every detail. The officers' names, Margaret's accusations, the passengers' reactions. She knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The cold metal of the handcuffs dug into Evelyn Carter's wrists as officers Mark Sullivan and Brian Delgado marched her through the crowded corridors of LAX. The terminal's noise, rolling suitcases, chattering travelers, and blaring announcements seemed to fade into a dull roar as passengers turned to stare. Evelyn kept her head high, her face a mask of calm despite the humiliation. Her navy blazer was slightly wrinkled from Delgado's rough handling, but her dignity remained untouched. Sullivan walked ahead, his expression smug, while Delgado kept a firm grip on her arm, muttering about troublemakers under his breath. They led her to a small airport police station, tucked in a quiet corner of the terminal. A stark room with fluorescent lights and a metal desk. Inside, Officer Robert Klein, a 45-year-old duty officer with a tired face, looked up from his paperwork as they entered. "Got a problem, passenger?" Sullivan said, tossing Evelyn's driver's license and boarding pass onto the desk. "Disturbing the peace, resisting orders, possible security threat?" Delgado smirked, adding, "She's got a real attitude problem." Evelyn stood silently, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. The officer's casual arrogance, Klein's neutral expression, the hum of a radio in the background. Klein picked up her ID, glancing at her name. Evelyn Carter, 55, Sacramento. He began typing her information into the computer, following routine protocol. "All right, ma'am," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Can you confirm your occupation for the record?" Sullivan and Delgado exchanged a glance, expecting some ordinary answer. A teacher, maybe, or an office worker, something to justify their actions. Evelyn took a slow, steady breath, her voice clear and unwavering. "I am Justice Evelyn Carter of the California Supreme Court." The words landed like a thunderclap. Klein's fingers froze on the keyboard, his pen slipping from his hand and clattering onto the desk. His eyes widened as he looked from Evelyn to her ID, then back again, his face paling. A Supreme Court justice, one of the most powerful judges in California, someone who could sway landmark cases and ruin careers with a single ruling. Sullivan's smug grin vanished, his mouth dropping open as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Delgado staggered back a step, his face turning ashen, his hands trembling. The weight of their mistake crashed over them like a tidal wave. They hadn't just cuffed a random passenger, they'd targeted a woman who held their fates in her hands. "Oh, Lord," Sullivan stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Justice Carter, we didn't know. This is a huge misunderstanding. I'm so sorry." He stepped forward, his hands raised in a pleading gesture, his eyes wide with panic. Delgado, usually brash, sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "Please, ma'am. Justice, I mean," he mumbled, his voice cracking. "We were just doing our job. We didn't mean... Please, don't do this to us." Their apologies were desperate, almost pathetic, but Evelyn's expression didn't soften. She'd seen too many hollow excuses in her courtroom to be swayed by their panic. The pain in her wrists and the sting of their earlier insults lingered, and she wasn't about to let them off easily. "Officer Klein," Evelyn said, her voice calm but commanding. "Remove these handcuffs immediately." Klein fumbled for the keys, his hands shaking as he unlocked the cuffs. Red marks circled Evelyn's wrists, a visible reminder of the injustice she'd endured. She rubbed her skin, then continued, her tone unwavering. "Now, contact your airport police chief and tell him Justice Evelyn Carter is here. I want him here right away. Also, call the U.S. Marshals Service and the Administrative Office of the California Supreme Court. Inform them of this incident." Klein nodded frantically, grabbing the phone to make the calls, his voice unsteady as he relayed her instructions. Sullivan and Delgado stood frozen, their careers flashing before their eyes. Evelyn's poise in the face of their groveling was a quiet triumph, a moment of strength that cut through the chaos. She wasn't just a victim, she was a force. And the reckoning was coming. The small airport police station at LAX buzzed with tension as Officer Robert Klein hung up the phone, his face pale. Justice Evelyn Carter stood tall, her wrists still marked from the handcuffs, her navy blazer slightly rumpled, but her authority unshaken. Within 20 minutes, the room filled with heavyweights, the airport police chief, his deputy, a senior security manager, and 2 U.S. Marshals in crisp suits, their badges gleaming. A representative from the California Supreme Court's Administrative Office arrived soon after, her notepad ready to document every detail. The news that a Supreme Court justice had been handcuffed and humiliated sent shockwaves through the terminal's chain of command. The chief, a stocky man with graying hair, approached Evelyn first, his voice low and apologetic. "Justice Carter, I'm deeply sorry for what happened. This is unacceptable. We'll get to the bottom of it, I promise." Evelyn nodded, her expression steady but unyielding. "I appreciate that, Chief, but apologies aren't enough. I want accountability." She sat at the metal desk, flanked by the court representative and a marshal, and began recounting the incident with precision. Margaret Hensley's baseless accusations, Officers Sullivan and Delgado's aggressive questioning, their racial insults, and the public handcuffing at Gate 47. Her voice was calm but firm, each word carrying the weight of her years on the bench. The chief listened, his face tightening with every detail, while Sullivan and Delgado stood in the corner, heads bowed, their badges and guns already confiscated. The room felt smaller as the gravity of their actions sank in. The chief acted swiftly. "Officers Sullivan and Delgado, you're suspended without pay, effective immediately," he said, his tone sharp. "Hand over your equipment. You're off duty until further notice." He turned to the security manager. "Pull all footage from Gate 47. Security cameras, body cams, everything. I want it preserved for investigation." The manager nodded, already on his phone to coordinate. The chief then ordered a joint investigation with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, signaling the seriousness of the case. Evelyn added, "I'd like statements from the gate agent, Lisa Nguyen, and any passengers who witnessed the incident. Their accounts matter." The court representative jotted down her request, ensuring it would be followed. Among the witnesses, a middle-aged couple who'd been near the front of the line stepped forward. The wife, her voice trembling with anger, described how Margaret's accusations seemed personal and how the officers escalated things without cause. "It was wrong," she said, her husband nodding beside her. "That woman did nothing but stand there, and they treated her like a criminal." Their words, heartfelt and raw, stirred a quiet pride in Evelyn. She wasn't alone in seeing the injustice. Other passengers offered to share their phone videos, which showed Delgado's outburst and the handcuffing, bolstering the evidence. The marshals took note, their expressions grim as they prepared to escort Evelyn to a secure lounge until her next flight. As the officials scrambled to contain the crisis, Evelyn remained composed, her strength a beacon in the chaos. She knew this was more than her personal ordeal. It was a chance to expose systemic flaws. The investigation was just beginning, but her resolve was clear. No one, not even a justice, should face such treatment. Justice would be served, one step at a time. The fallout from the incident at LAX was swift and unforgiving. The joint investigation by the airport police and the FBI's Civil Rights Division moved quickly, piecing together a damning case against officers Mark Sullivan and Brian Delgado. Security footage from Gate 47 showed their aggressive approach, while body cam recordings captured their racial insults and baseless accusations against Justice Evelyn Carter. Passenger videos, including those from the middle-aged couple, corroborated Evelyn's account, showing her calm demeanor against the officers' hostility. Lisa Nguyen, the gate agent, provided a statement describing Margaret Hensley's role in sparking the confrontation with her false claims. The evidence was overwhelming, leaving no room for excuses. Within weeks, the airport police chief made it official. Sullivan and Delgado were fired, their careers in law enforcement over. But losing their jobs was only the beginning. The U.S. Attorney's Office took up the case, filing federal charges against the former officers for violating civil rights, unlawful detention, and abuse of authority. The trial, held in a Los Angeles federal courthouse, drew heavy media attention. Evelyn testified with the same poise she'd shown at the airport, her voice steady as she recounted the humiliation of being handcuffed in front of hundreds. The prosecution played the videos, letting Sullivan's skeptical tone and Delgado's shouted insults speak for themselves. The defense tried to argue the officers acted on a passenger's complaint, But the jury wasn't swayed. After a short deliberation, they found both men guilty. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for misconduct, sentenced Sullivan and Delgado each to 3 years in federal prison. "You betrayed the public's trust," she said, her words echoing in the packed courtroom. "Your actions targeted a respected justice because of her race, and that demands accountability." The sentence was a clear message. No one is above the law. Margaret Hensley faced her own reckoning. Investigators tracked her down in San Diego, where she'd returned after the flight. Faced with evidence of her false accusations and the chaos they caused, Margaret's arrogance crumbled. The U.S. Attorney's Office considered charging her with making false statements to law enforcement, a crime that could have meant jail time. Evelyn also had grounds for a civil lawsuit, which could have cost Margaret millions. Desperate to avoid a trial, Margaret's lawyer negotiated a deal. She pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of providing misleading information and agreed to pay a $300,000 fine, a steep hit to her wealth. At the hearing, Margaret sat quietly, her designer clothes no shield against the judge's scolding. "Your prejudice set this in motion," he said. "You're lucky to avoid worse." The fine stung, but the public shame cut deeper, her name now tied to a scandal that made headlines. Evelyn, though scarred by the ordeal, refused to let it define her. Back in Sacramento, she returned to the California Supreme Court, her resolve stronger than ever. The red marks on her wrists had faded, but the memory of that Friday at LAX lingered, fueling her commitment to justice. She spoke at legal conferences about the incident, not as a victim, but as a call to action against bias in law enforcement. Her strength inspired colleagues and strangers alike, from the passengers who'd witnessed her dignity to the countless Americans who read her story. The couple from the gate sent her a letter, thanking her for standing tall and giving them hope. Evelyn kept it on her desk, a reminder of why she fought. The case became a touchstone, sparking training reforms at LAX and beyond, emphasizing de-escalation and accountability. For Evelyn, it was a bittersweet victory. The pain of being targeted for her race would never fully fade, but she channeled it into her work, shaping a fairer system one ruling at a time. As she looked out her office window at the Sacramento skyline, she felt a quiet pride. She'd faced injustice head-on and emerged stronger, a beacon for those who believed in doing right. The fight wasn't over, but Evelyn Carter was ready for whatever came next. Evelyn Carter's story didn't end in the courtroom or the headlines. Back at the California Supreme Court, she continued her work with a fire that burned brighter than ever. The LAX incident wasn't just a personal trial. It was a mirror held up to society, reflecting the deep scars of prejudice and the power of standing firm. Evelyn knew that change started with accountability, not just for officers like Sullivan and Delgado, but for everyone who let bias shape their actions. She began mentoring young lawyers, especially women of color, urging them to claim their space with courage. "Your voice matters," she'd tell them, her eyes steady. "Don't let anyone make you feel small." Her words carried the weight of experience, inspiring a new generation to fight for fairness. The lessons from that day at Gate 47 rippled outward. For the passengers who witnessed Evelyn's grace under pressure, it was a reminder to speak up when they saw wrong, even when it felt risky. For law enforcement, it was a wake-up call to root out bias and rebuild trust. And for everyday folks, it showed that justice, though slow, could prevail when truth and resilience led the way. Evelyn's story taught us to look beyond appearances, to question snap judgments, and to hold ourselves accountable for the harm we might cause, intentionally or not. It's a call to live with integrity, to treat every person with the respect they deserve, no matter who they are. Evelyn's journey is one of many we share to inspire and uplift. If her story moved you, hit that subscribe button and join our YouTube community. Don't miss more meaningful stories like this one. Tales of courage, justice, and hope that remind us to be better every day. Together, let's keep these lessons alive.